That day, in a brightly lit conference room with 30 pairs of eyes watching, I was erased from the company with nothing more than a cold, dismissive command from the CEO. My hands trembled as I gathered my things, feeling their stares burn into my back. He stood there, arms crossed, savoring his power. But what he didn't know was that this moment of public humiliation would ignite a revenge that would bring his entire empire crashing down. Sometimes, the person you destroy in front of everyone becomes the very one who destroys you when no one's watching. My name is Allison Green, and for 3 years, I poured my soul into Novosphere Solutions, a mid-sized tech company nestled in the sprawling suburbs of Chicago. At 32, I thought I'd finally found my place in the corporate world, climbing steadily through the ranks with my business administration degree and an unshakable belief that hard work actually meant something. The Novosphere building stood like a glass monument to modern ambition, all sleek lines and reflective surfaces that caught the morning sun. Inside, it was a different story. The open-plan office buzzed with the constant hum of keyboards, hushed phone calls, and the underlying current of anxiety that seemed to power every tech company in America. We lived by the tyranny of deadlines, each project more critical than the last, each failure potentially career-ending. I'd learned to navigate the unspoken rules quickly, arrive before 8, leave after 7, smile at the right people, never show weakness. The coffee machine on the 3rd floor was where alliances formed and dissolved, where whispered conversations could make or break your next promotion. I mastered the art of looking busy even during the rare, quiet moments, because being seen as idle was worse than being incompetent. My desk sat in the middle section of the floor, neither too close to the executives' glass offices nor relegated to the dreaded spots by the bathroom. It was a carefully earned position, decorated with a small succulent that somehow survived despite the fluorescent lighting and a framed photo from my college graduation. A reminder of simpler times when success seemed like a straight line instead of a maze. The work itself consumed me. As a project manager in the product development division, I juggled multiple teams, impossible timelines, and the ever-changing whims of upper management. Every day brought new fires to extinguish. The developers would miss deadlines, the designers would clash with marketing, and somehow, it always fell on me to make it work. I became fluent in the language of corporate diplomacy, translating between technical jargon and executive speak, smoothing over conflicts with carefully worded emails and strategic coffee runs. But I was good at it. Really good. My projects had a 90% success rate, higher than anyone else at my level. I'd pulled off miracles, launching products that everyone said would fail, salvaging disasters that should have tanked entire quarters. My performance reviews glowed with phrases like exceeds expectations and valuable team player. The culture at Novosphere was what they called competitive excellence in the employee handbook. But we all knew what it really meant: eat or be eaten. Colleagues would share drinks on Friday evenings, toasting to teamwork, then spend Monday morning undermining each other in meetings. I watched people I'd trained leapfrog over me because they played golf with the right executives or laughed at the right jokes. The glass ceiling here wasn't just about gender, though that certainly didn't help. It was about knowing which hands to shake and which backs to stab. Still, I believed I could make it on merit alone. My Midwest upbringing had instilled in me this naive faith in fairness, this idea that if you kept your head down and did exceptional work, recognition would follow. My parents, both teachers, had raised me to believe in the system, to trust that institutions rewarded dedication. Even as I watched less qualified people advance, even as my ideas were repackaged and presented by male colleagues who received the credit, I held on to that belief like a life raft in stormy seas. The warning signs were there, of course, the way certain executives would talk over me in meetings, the projects that mysteriously got reassigned just as they were about to succeed, the casual comments about my aggressive communication style when I was simply being direct. But I absorbed it all, internalized it, worked harder. If I just proved myself one more time, delivered one more impossible project, surely they'd see my value. I remember the exact moment I should have known better. It was a Tuesday. 3 months before everything fell apart. I'd just presented a new initiative that could save the company $2 million annually. The room was silent for a moment. Then, Richard Vaughn, our CEO, looked right through me and asked my male colleague to explain the technical details of Allison's idea, as if I couldn't possibly understand my own proposal. But I smiled. I always smiled. Because that's what you do when you're a woman in tech, trying to be taken seriously while walking the tightrope between being labeled too soft or too aggressive. You smile, you adapt, you survive. I had no idea that soon surviving wouldn't be enough. That all my careful navigation, all my diplomatic victories would crumble in a single afternoon. The corporate world I'd tried so hard to master was about to teach me its cruelest lesson. Sometimes, no matter how good you are, someone with more power can erase you with a word. The morning of my execution started like any other. I arrived at 7:45, coffee in hand, already mentally preparing for the quarterly all-hands meeting scheduled for 10. These gatherings were Richard Vaughn's favorite stage, where he could parade his authority in front of the entire company. At 50, with silver hair perfectly styled and suits that cost more than my monthly rent, he embodied everything corporate America worshipped: ruthless ambition wrapped in a veneer of leadership excellence. Richard had built Novasphere from a startup to a mid-sized powerhouse, and he never let anyone forget it. He ruled through fear disguised as high standards. His mood swings legendary among the staff. One day you'd be his golden child. The next you'd be publicly ridiculed for a minor oversight. We'd all learned to read the signs, the set of his jaw, the way he'd adjust his Rolex when irritated, the particular tone that meant someone was about to be demolished. As I settled into the large conference room with 30 other employees, I noticed Richard's energy was different, predatory. His eyes swept the room and lingered on me for a beat too long. My stomach clenched, but I pushed the feeling aside. The Morrison project had hit some snags, yes, but nothing catastrophic. Nothing that couldn't be explained by the impossible timeline and budget constraints he'd imposed. Before we begin, Richard's voice cut through the morning chatter. We need to address a failure that's cost this company significantly. The room went silent. This wasn't on the agenda. The Morrison project, he continued, his voice dripping with contempt, was supposed to be our flagship launch this quarter. Instead, it's become an embarrassment. A complete disaster that's damaged our reputation with key stakeholders. My mouth went dry. The Morrison project had challenges, but calling it a disaster was a gross exaggeration. We were 2 weeks behind schedule. Yes, but that was because Richard had personally insisted on adding features without extending the deadline. Allison, he said my name like it was something distasteful. Would you like to explain to everyone here how you managed to fumble such a critical initiative? 30 heads turned to me. I could feel the blood draining from my face, my hands starting to shake under the table. I stood slowly, trying to maintain composure. The project faced several unexpected challenges. I began, my voice steadier than I felt. The scope changes requested last month. Excuses? Richard interrupted, his hand slicing through the air. Always excuses with you. A competent project manager would have adapted. A competent professional would have delivered. The word, competent, hit like a slap. 3 years of excellent reviews, of successful launches, reduced to nothing. I opened my mouth to respond, to defend myself with facts and figures I knew by heart. But Richard wasn't done. This level of incompetence is unacceptable, he continued, now pacing like a prosecutor delivering a closing argument. We cannot afford to carry dead weight, especially in leadership positions. Your consistent inability to meet expectations, your lack of accountability, and your failure to align with Novasphere's standards of excellence leave me no choice. Consistent inability? Lack of accountability? The lies were so bold, so contrary to my documented performance, that I almost laughed from the absurdity. But the room was tomb silent, everyone avoiding eye contact with me like failure might be contagious. Effective immediately. Your employment with Novasphere is terminated. The words hung in the air, sharp and final. Someone gasped, A few people shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke up. No one mentioned my 3 years of successful projects. The times I'd saved their deadlines, the problems I'd solved, they all just watched. Security will escort you to clear your desk, Richard added, as if I might steal something. As if I was suddenly a threat. You have 15 minutes. I stood there, frozen, my mind struggling to process what was happening. This wasn't how terminations worked. There should be HR meetings, documentation, progressive discipline, not this public execution. This theatrical humiliation designed for maximum impact. Now, Allison. Richard's voice carried a note of satisfaction. We have a real meeting to conduct. The walk to my desk felt endless. Tom from security, who I'd chatted with every morning for 3 years, couldn't meet my eyes as he stood beside me. My hands shook as I packed my belongings into a cardboard box. The cliché wasn't lost on me. The succulent, the graduation photo. 3 years compressed into a container I could carry with one arm. The worst part was the silence. 30 colleagues I'd worked beside, helped, covered for, and not one word of support. They all stayed glued to their screens, pretending not to see me being erased from the place I'd given everything to. Maria, who I'd recommended for promotion, studied her keyboard intently. James, whose project I'd saved just last month, suddenly had an urgent phone call. As security escorted me through the lobby, past the modern art installations and motivational posters about teamwork and excellence, I caught my reflection in the glass doors. I looked small, defeated, carrying my cardboard box like every terminated employee in every corporate movie I'd ever seen. Behind me, the building continued its normal rhythm, already forgetting I'd ever existed. But in that reflection, beneath the shock and humiliation, I saw something else. A spark of rage, pure and bright. Richard Vaughn had chosen to destroy me publicly, to make an example of me in front of everyone who mattered in my professional world. He'd stripped me of my dignity, my income, my identity as a successful professional. Standing in the parking lot, box in hand, I made a promise to myself. This wasn't over. Richard Vaughn had just made the biggest mistake of his career. He'd humiliated the wrong woman. The first week after my termination, I couldn't leave my apartment. The blinds stayed closed, takeout containers piled up on the coffee table, and I existed in a haze of disbelief and humiliation. The scene replayed endlessly in my mind, 30 pairs of eyes watching my professional death. Richard's satisfied smirk, the weight of that cardboard box in my arms. I'd wake at 3 a.m., heart racing, reliving every word, wondering what I could have said differently, how I could have fought back. My savings would last 3 months if I was careful. The unemployment filing was submitted, though the thought of explaining my termination to some bureaucrat made me sick. My laptop sat unopened on the kitchen counter. I couldn't bear to update my LinkedIn to craft some sanitized version of events that would make me employable again. How do you explain being fired like that? How do you spin public humiliation into a learning experience? The isolation was suffocating. Word traveled fast in Chicago's tech circles. Former colleagues who'd promised to keep in touch went silent. My phone, once buzzing with Slack notifications and meeting reminders, became a monument to my irrelevance. The only text came from my boyfriend, Marcus, and even those carried an undertone I couldn't ignore. Maybe you pushed too hard, he said one evening, attempting comfort while questioning my judgment. You know how sensitive these executive egos can be. Perhaps if you'd been more diplomatic, as if I hadn't spent 3 years perfecting the art of corporate diplomacy, as if my termination was somehow my fault for not managing Richard's narcissism better. Marcus meant well, but his words cut deeper than he knew. Even he, who'd watched me work 16-hour days, who'd seen me sacrifice weekends and vacations for Novosphere, wondered if I'd brought this on myself. My parents called daily from Milwaukee, their teacher salaries stretching to offer financial help I was too proud to accept. Come home, my mother pleaded. Take some time to regroup. But returning home felt like admitting defeat, like Richard had not only taken my job, but my independence too. The neighbors whispered when I collected my mail. The building's gossip network had clearly been activated. I overheard fragments of conversation in the hallway. Fired from that tech company. Must have done something serious. Always seemed so stressed. Their speculation became my reality. Each imagined scandal worse than the truth. By the second week, despair hardened into something else. I started having dreams where I confronted Richard, where I stood up in that meeting and exposed every dirty secret I knew about Novasphere's operations. The dreams felt more real than my waking hours, more purposeful than my endless scrolling through job boards for positions I couldn't bring myself to apply for. One night, unable to sleep, I opened my laptop and started writing. Not a resume, but a timeline. Every incident, every red flag, every moment Richard had shown his true nature. The project he'd taken credit for in 2022. The harassment complaint from Jennifer that mysteriously disappeared. The way he'd manipulated the board by presenting falsified user metrics. I'd been a good soldier, keeping my head down, maintaining loyalty to a company that had none for me. But I'd also been observant. I'd kept receipts. The document grew to 20 pages, then 30. Evidence I'd unconsciously collected. Emails I'd saved just in case. Patterns I'd noticed but never connected. Richard Vaughn wasn't just a bad boss. He was a liability Novasphere couldn't afford if the truth came out. The Morrison project failure, I documented how he'd personally insisted on changes that derailed the timeline, then deleted the email trail. But I had screenshots. I always had screenshots. At 4 a.m. on a Thursday. After 2 weeks of isolation and self-doubt, I stood in my dark kitchen and made a decision. I wouldn't slink away quietly like Richard expected. I wouldn't disappear into the unemployment statistics, another casualty of corporate cruelty. He'd made this personal when he chose to destroy me publicly. He'd turned my termination into theater, so I'd give him a show he'd never forget. I walked to the window and opened the blinds for the first time in days. The city sprawled before me, lights twinkling with possibility. Somewhere out there, Richard was probably sleeping soundly in his Lincoln Park mansion, confident he'd eliminated a problem. He had no idea he'd just created his biggest one. "You wanted to bury me," I whispered to the city lights, to Richard, to everyone who'd watched my humiliation in silence. "But you forgot that buried things can grow roots, and roots can crack foundations." The sun was rising, painting the sky in shades of amber and gold. I made coffee, opened a fresh document on my laptop, and began typing. Strategic Response Plan. The despair that had paralyzed me for 2 weeks crystallized into purpose. Richard Vaughn had torn down everything I'd built, but he'd also freed me from the corporate loyalty that had kept me silent. I thought about every employee still trapped at Novasphere, keeping their heads down, hoping they wouldn't be next. I thought about Jennifer, whose complaint had vanished. I thought about the investors being deceived by manipulated metrics. I thought about my own reputation, destroyed in 30 minutes of calculated cruelty. My phone buzzed. Marcus again, asking if I wanted to talk. I declined the call and deleted his contact. Anyone who thought I should have been more diplomatic with my executioner didn't belong in my next chapter. I opened my email and started a new message to an old college friend who'd become a labor attorney. "Sarah," I typed, "I need your help with something. How familiar are you with wrongful termination and whistleblower protections?" The fear was still there, lurking beneath the determination, but it no longer paralyzed me. Richard had already done his worst. He'd destroyed my career publicly, humiliated me in front of my peers, stripped me of my professional identity. What more could he take? He was about to learn that when you leave someone with nothing to lose, you create someone with everything to fight for. Sarah's law office occupied the 20th floor of a downtown Chicago high-rise. All mahogany and leather that whispered serious business. She'd traded her college idealism for corporate law. But when I explained my situation, I saw the old fire reignite in her eyes. "This is a textbook case of wrongful termination," she said, reviewing the documentation I'd compiled. "Public humiliation, no progressive discipline, falsified performance claims. Richard Vaughn handed us a gift. But litigation is just one avenue. What else do you have? I slid a USB drive across her desk. 3 years of evidence, financial irregularities, falsified reports to investors, EEOC violations that were buried. Richard's been cooking the books to inflate Novasphere's valuation before the planned acquisition next year. Sarah's eyebrows rose as she scrolled through the files. This is extensive. How did you? I was project manager. I had access to everything, and I've always been thorough about documentation. Richard counted on my loyalty to keep me quiet. He miscalculated. While Sarah built the legal case, I worked another angle. Late nights were spent in online forums where tech workers shared their horror stories. I created an anonymous account, Novasphere Insider. My first post was careful, factual. Questions about financial discrepancies at Novasphere Solutions, seeking others with information. The response was immediate. Private messages flooded in from current and former employees. Jennifer, the woman whose harassment complaint had vanished, reached out. I've been waiting for someone to speak up. Her message read, I have recordings. Within a week, I'd built a network of 15 people with grievances against Richard and Novasphere. We created a secure signal group, sharing evidence and stories. Mike from accounting had proof of the cooked books. David from HR had documentation of buried complaints. Lisa from marketing had emails showing Richard's direct involvement in deceiving investors. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Tom, the security guard who'd escorted me out, sent a message through a mutual friend. I felt sick watching what they did to you, he wrote. I have access to the security footage from that meeting. The audio clearly shows Richard lying about your performance. If you need it, it's yours. Security footage with audio. Richard's public execution of me, preserved in digital amber. My hands shook as I read Tom's message. This wasn't just evidence, it was vindication. I met Tom at a coffee shop in Wicker Park, far from Novasphere's territory. He looked nervous, sliding a flash drive across the table like we were in a spy movie. I could lose my job for this, he said quietly. Tom, after what you've seen, do you really want to keep working there? He laughed bitterly. I've got 2 kids in college, but watching what they did to you, it wasn't right. You were one of the few people who treated security like humans, not furniture. The footage was everything Sarah needed. Richard's performance was captured in high definition. The theatrical pacing, the false accusations, the satisfaction in his voice as he terminated me. More importantly, it captured the fear in everyone else's faces, the toxic culture made visible. I started reaching out to journalists who covered corporate malfeasance. Christine Walsh at the Tribune was interested but cautious. I need more than disgruntled employee stories, she said. I need documentation, patterns, something that shows systemic issues. I have all of that, I assured her. Financial fraud, buried harassment complaints, wrongful terminations, and I have a network of sources willing to go on record. Meanwhile, the Signal group grew to 25 members. We discovered Richard's pattern. Every quarter, before board meetings, he'd publicly fire someone to demonstrate leadership. The scapegoats were always people who'd questioned him or knew too much. I wasn't special. I was just the latest sacrifice. Sarah filed the wrongful termination suit, but that was just the opening salvo. The real weapon was the complaint to the SEC about financial fraud, backed by Mike's evidence from accounting. Another complaint went to the Department of Labor about systematic harassment and retaliation. Each filing was a precisely aimed shot at Novasphere's vulnerabilities. The network became more bold. People still inside Novasphere started documenting everything, recording meetings, screenshotting messages, downloading files. We created a shared drive, building an archive that would make WikiLeaks jealous. Every dirty secret, every lie, every crime Richard thought was buried. We excavated it all. 3 weeks into my campaign, I got an unexpected call. Patricia Stern, a Novasphere board member, wanted to meet privately. We met at the Art Institute, walking through galleries like tourists while discussing corporate destruction. The board is aware of your lawsuit, she said carefully. Some of us have had concerns about Richard's leadership style. His leadership style? I laughed. Is that what you call fraud and harassment? Do you have proof of the fraud allegations? I studied her face, calculating the risk. I have everything. The question is, what's the board prepared to do about it? Patricia was quiet for a moment, studying a Monet. Richard has strong support from key investors, but if there was substantial evidence of financial irregularities, that would change things. I recognized the dance. She wanted Richard gone but needed coverage, plausible deniability. The board would act if forced, but they wouldn't stick their necks out. The evidence will become public soon. I told her, the board can either get ahead of it or be buried alongside Richard, your choice. That night, I sat in my apartment, looking at the war room I'd created, whiteboards covered with timelines, boxes of printed documents, laptops running encrypted communications. In 3 weeks, I'd transformed from a discarded employee to the architect of Richard's downfall. My phone buzzed with a message from the Signal group. "We're with you," it read, followed by 24 thumbs-up emojis. These people, many still risking their jobs, were trusting me to lead this fight. I thought about Richard, probably at home in his mansion, oblivious to the storm building around him. He'd wanted to make an example of me, to show everyone what happened when you crossed him. He'd succeeded, just not in the way he intended. I was indeed an example of what happens when you push someone too far, when you humiliate the wrong person, when you forget that the people you step on might know where your bodies are buried. The opening moves were complete. The pieces were in position. Now it was time to show Richard Vaughn what checkmate looked like. The first leak appeared on a Sunday morning. An anonymous post on TechCrunch's tip line, Novasphere Solutions inflating user metrics ahead of acquisition. The article was brief, speculative, but it planted the seed. By Monday, Novasphere's stock had dipped 3%. I watched from my apartment as Richard sent a company-wide email dismissing the story as baseless rumors from disgruntled former employees. His confidence was almost admirable. He had no idea this was just the opening note of a symphony I'd been composing for weeks. The second leak came 3 days later, this time to the Chicago Tribune. Christine Walsh had crafted a masterpiece from the documentation I'd provided. Inside Novasphere, a culture of fear and financial deception. The article featured anonymous quotes from current employees describing Richard's reign of terror, the quarterly firing rituals, the buried complaints. It was careful, factual, and devastating. Richard's response was predictable. He called an emergency all-hands meeting, ranting about loyalty and betrayal, threatening legal action against anyone speaking to media. According to my sources still inside, he turned paranoid, installing monitoring software on company computers, hiring an external firm to investigate the leaks. He's losing it. Jennifer messaged our Signal group, screaming at executives, accusing random people of being moles. The whole office is terrified. Perfect. A paranoid. Richard was a sloppy Richard. The third wave wasn't a leak, it was a flood. Mike from accounting, brave soul that he was, walked into the SEC office with boxes of evidence, falsified revenue reports, manipulated user data, offshore accounts hiding losses. He'd spent 3 years documenting Richard's financial crimes, waiting for the right moment. My campaign had given him the courage to act. Within hours, the SEC announced a formal investigation into Novasphere's financial practices. The stock price plummeted 15%. Board members started distancing themselves from Richard in carefully worded statements. I waited until the chaos was at its peak before launching the next phase. The security footage of my firing, edited to highlight Richard's most damaging statements, found its way to Reddit. CEO publicly humiliates employee before illegal termination, went viral within hours. The video was brutal in its clarity, Richard's smug satisfaction, the fear in the room, my visible shock and humiliation. The internet's response was swift and merciless. Novasphere nightmares started trending. Richard Vaughn became the face of toxic corporate culture. Memes proliferated. His LinkedIn was bombarded with angry comments before he deleted it entirely. Local news picked up the story, then national outlets. Another tech tyrant exposed read the CNN business headline. Richard's face was everywhere, always accompanied by the worst screenshots from the video, his sneer, his dismissive hand wave, his cold eyes as he destroyed my career. The Signal group was electric with updates. HR just shredded a bunch of documents, David reported. Legal team is in full crisis mode, added Lisa. 3 executives just submitted resignations, Mike confirmed. But Richard wasn't going down without a fight. Novosphere hired a crisis management firm that immediately went on the offensive. They painted me as a disgruntled former employee with an agenda, suggesting I'd been terminated for legitimate performance issues and was now seeking revenge. This was expected. Sarah and I had prepared for it. We released the performance reviews. 3 years of exceeds expectations, glowing recommendations, successful project completions. Then we released the emails. Richard himself praising my work just 2 weeks before firing me. The contrast with his public statements was damning. Jennifer, emboldened by the momentum, decided to go public with her harassment complaint. She gave an exclusive interview to the Tribune, detailing how Richard had propositioned her, then buried her complaint when she refused. She had recordings of HR telling her to think about her future at the company if she pursued it. The dam broke. 7 more women came forward with similar stories. The EEOC announced their own investigation. Novosphere's few female executives started resigning en masse. I got a call from Patricia Stern. The board is meeting tomorrow, she said tersely. The evidence you've made public is concerning. Some members feel a leadership change might be necessary. Might be. I laughed. Your company is being investigated by the SEC and EEOC simultaneously. Your stock has lost 30% of its value. Richard is toxic waste. There's no might be about it. What do you want, Allison? The question hung between us. What did I want? Money? My job back? An apology? I want Richard Vaughn to be fired the same way he fired me. I said, publicly, humiliated, in front of as many people as possible. Patricia was quiet for a long moment. That's unusual. So was firing me in front of 30 colleagues for his ego trip. Richard likes an audience. Let's give him one. The next morning, something beautiful happened. 40 current Novosphere employees staged a walkout, standing in front of the building with signs. We stand with Allison. End the culture of fear. Fire Richard Vaughn. Local news crews, tipped off by someone in our Signal group, were there to capture it all. Inside, according to my sources, chaos reigned. Clients were calling to cancel contracts. Investors were demanding answers. The acquisition talks had been suspended. Richard was holed up in his office, reportedly cycling between rage and denial. Then came the killing blow. The FBI announced they were joining the investigation, looking into potential wire fraud and investor deception. This wasn't just about civil penalties anymore. Richard was facing potential criminal charges. My phone rang constantly, journalists, lawyers, other Richard victims reaching out with their stories. I gave selective interviews, always staying on message. This wasn't about revenge, it was about accountability, about protecting future employees from suffering what I and others had endured. But of course, it was about revenge. Every article, every leak, every revelation was a returned blow for that day in the conference room. Richard had wanted to destroy me publicly. Now the whole world was watching his destruction. That evening, I stood outside Novosphere's building, watching employees stream out. Many carrying boxes, not fired, but fleeing the sinking ship. Through the glass lobby, I could see the chaos I'd orchestrated playing out in real time. Security guards huddled nervously. Executives barked into phones. The modern art installations and motivational posters looked absurd against the backdrop of corporate collapse. Tomorrow, the board would meet. Patricia had all but confirmed Richard's fate, but I wouldn't be satisfied until I saw it happen, until he experienced a fraction of the humiliation he'd inflicted on me. I thought about the Allison from 6 weeks ago, carrying her cardboard box out of this building, destroyed, and hopeless. She could never have imagined this moment, standing outside as the architect of Richard's downfall, watching his empire crumble in real time. The first phase of my revenge was complete. Richard's reputation was destroyed, his company was in chaos, and his freedom was in jeopardy. But the final act was yet to come. The board meeting tomorrow would be his last day at Novosphere, and I intended to make sure it was a day he'd never forget. The board meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. on a Tuesday. By noon, the Novosphere lobby was packed with media crews, protesters, and employees who'd called in sick to witness history. I arrived at 1:30, dressed in the same blazer I'd worn the day Richard fired me. A small act of poetic justice only I would appreciate. Patricia Stern met me at the security desk, her face tight with stress. The board has agreed to your unusual request. Richard will be informed of the decision in the main conference room, the same one where he fired me. I finished. Yes, I remember. You can observe from the executive viewing room. One-way glass. I shook my head. No, I'll be in the room. If Richard gets to have an audience for his executions, he should have one for his own. Patricia looked uncomfortable, but didn't argue. The past weeks had shifted the power dynamic. I held too many cards, knew too many secrets. The board needed me cooperative for the investigations ahead. The conference room was already filling when we arrived. Board members took their positions at the long table, their faces grave. Several executives lingered by the walls, supposedly there for the transition planning. Everyone knew the real reason. They wanted to witness Richard's fall. At 1:55, Richard entered, and I barely recognized him. Gone was the commanding presence, the perfect hair, the $1,000 swagger. He looked haggard, diminished, his suit wrinkled and eyes bloodshot. He'd clearly been drinking. When he saw me sitting in the corner, his face went from pale to crimson. "What the hell is she doing here?" he snarled at Patricia. "This is a board meeting." "Sit down, Richard." Patricia's voice was steel. "We have matters to discuss." The board chairman, William Morrison, yes, the same Morrison whose project I'd been blamed for, cleared his throat. "Richard, the board has completed its review of recent events, the SEC investigation, the EEOC complaints, the financial irregularities." "Alleged irregularities." Richard interrupted, but his voice lacked conviction. "The evidence is overwhelming," William continued. "You've exposed this company to massive legal liability. You've destroyed our reputation. The acquisition is dead. We're facing potential criminal charges." Richard's hands gripped the table edge. "I built this company. Everything you have is because of me." "And you're destroying it," Patricia interjected. "The culture you've created, the fear, the manipulation, it ends today." William stood, the formal resolution in his hands. "The board has voted, unanimous decision. Your employment with Novosphere Solutions is terminated, effective immediately. Your equity is forfeit under the moral turpitude clause. You're banned from the premises and prohibited from any contact with employees." The words hung in the air. The same verdict, delivered in the same room. But now Richard was the one being erased. "You can't do this." Richard's voice cracked. "I have contracts. Golden parachutes. All void under the criminal investigation clause," the company lawyer added. "You'll be leaving with nothing, just like the employees you enjoyed firing so much." Richard turned to me then, his eyes wild with rage. You did this. You vindictive little..." "I documented it," I said calmly, standing to face him. "Every crime, every lie, every person you destroyed for sport. You taught me well, Richard. Always keep receipts." "This is revenge," he spat. "No," I replied. "Revenge would be if I destroyed you for no reason, the way you destroyed me. This is consequence. You committed fraud, you harassed employees, you created a culture of fear. I just made sure everyone knew about it." Security entered. Tom and another guard. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Tom looked Richard in the eye this time, no deference, no fear. "Sir, we need to escort you out," Tom said, and I heard the satisfaction in his voice. Richard looked around the room desperately, searching for an ally, a lifeline. He found only cold faces and averted eyes. The executives who'd laughed at his jokes enabled his behavior. They all studied their phones or the wall art. 15 minutes to clear your desk, William said. Security will supervise. As Richard was let out, he turned back one more time. I'll sue, I'll bury all of you. With what money? Patricia asked. Your assets will be frozen pending the federal investigation. Your reputation is destroyed. No firm will touch you. It's over. Richard? The walk to his office was broadcast live on local news, someone live streaming from their phone. Richard Vaughn, once the king of Novosphere, shuffling through the halls with a security escort, employees openly recording his humiliation. Some watched in silence, others whispered. A few, the brave ones, applauded. I followed at a distance, needing to see this through to the end. His office, once a shrine to his ego with its awards and photos with politicians, looked smaller as he packed. He moved mechanically, defeated, occasionally muttering to himself. The cardboard box, that universal symbol of corporate termination, appeared. Richard stared at it like it might bite him. Tom handed it over with what could only be described as professional glee. The Morrison file, Richard said suddenly, looking at me. You were supposed to fail. I set you up to fail. I know, I replied. I've always known. But you forgot something crucial. I kept every email, every changed requirement, every impossible deadline you imposed. It's all evidence now. The elevator ride down was silent except for the ding of passing floors. In the lobby, the crowd had grown. Former employees had joined the current ones. Jennifer stood near the front, her presence a silent accusation. Mike from accounting was there, the man whose testimony had triggered the FBI investigation. As Richard emerged, carrying his sad cardboard box, someone started slow clapping, then another. Soon the lobby echoed with sarcastic applause, the sound following him through the glass doors onto the street where news cameras waited. Mr. Vaughn, do you have any comment on the federal investigation? Mr. Vaughn, what about the harassment allegations? Richard, how does it feel to be fired the same way you fired Allison Green? That last question made him stop. He turned, searching the crowd, and found me standing just inside the glass doors. For a moment, our eyes met. I saw it all there, the rage, the disbelief, the dawning recognition that he'd created his own destroyer. I didn't smile, I didn't gloat. I simply nodded, then turned and walked away. Behind me, I heard him shouting at reporters, denying everything, blaming everyone but himself. But his voice faded as I walked deeper into the building, past employees who nodded at me with something between fear and respect. Patricia found me in the old conference room, staring at the chair where I'd sat during my execution. The board wants to discuss a potential consulting role for you. Help us rebuild the culture, implement new policies. I almost laughed. Return to Novosphere? Work for the people who'd watched my humiliation in silence? No, I said simply. I'm done here. You'll figure it out, or you won't. Either way, it's not my problem anymore. I left through the front entrance one last time. Richard was gone, but the crowd remained, energized by witnessing the fall of a tyrant. Some recognized me, pointing and whispering. A few applauded. Jennifer pushed through and hugged me tightly. Thank you, she whispered. For all of us. I hugged her back, then walked to my car. In my pocket, my phone buzzed with messages. Job offers from companies that had seen my story. Interview requests from major media outlets. Sarah texting about the settlement. Novosphere would inevitably offer to make the wrongful termination suit go away. But I didn't check any of them. Not yet. First, I needed to sit with this moment, this feeling of completion. Richard Vaughn had been destroyed as publicly and thoroughly as he'd destroyed others. The empire he'd built on fear and manipulation was crumbling. Justice, or something close enough to it, had been served. The sun was setting as I drove away from Novosphere for the last time. painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. 6 weeks ago, I'd left in shame and defeat. Today, I left victorious. The revenge was complete, executed with the same calculated precision Richard had taught me. He'd wanted to bury me. Instead, he'd created his own gravedigger. The final blow came 2 weeks after Richard's termination, orchestrated with the precision of a conductor leading the crescendo of a symphony. I sat in my apartment, laptop open, watching the clock tick toward 9 a.m. Eastern. At exactly 9:01, the Wall Street Journal published their investigative piece, 3 months of Richard's private emails, obtained legally through the discovery process of multiple lawsuits. The emails revealed everything: his contempt for employees, his explicit strategies for psychological manipulation, and most damningly, his conspiracy to defraud investors. Within minutes, my phone erupted. The signal group was electric. "It's everywhere," Jennifer messaged. "CNN, CNBC, Bloomberg, they're all running it." But I wasn't done. At 9:30, coordinated across 5 major cities, former Novosphere employees held press conferences. Each told their story of Richard's abuse, backed by documentation we'd collected. The human cost of his leadership was laid bare: mental health crises, destroyed careers, families torn apart by the toxic culture he'd cultivated. At 10 a.m., the FBI arrested Richard at his Lincoln Park mansion. Someone, definitely not me, though I'd made sure certain journalists were aware of the timing, had tipped off the media. Every major outlet carried the footage: Richard in handcuffs, being led to a federal vehicle, his lawyer scrambling behind shouting about prosecutorial overreach. The image that would define him forever came when he stumbled on his front steps, the FBI agent catching his arm. In that moment, he looked small, pathetic. Nothing like the titan who'd terrorized employees for years. The photo went viral immediately, becoming a meme within hours. The Fall of Richard Vaughn would later win a Pulitzer. By noon, Novosphere's remaining executives were in full damage control mode. They announced a comprehensive restructuring, appointed a new interim CEO known for ethical leadership, and pledged millions to workplace mental health initiatives. Too little, too late, but at least future employees might benefit. The criminal trial would come later, but the court of public opinion had already rendered its verdict. Richard's name became synonymous with corporate toxicity. Business schools started using him as a case study in how not to lead. His wife filed for divorce, his country club revoked his membership, and his carefully cultivated network of powerful friends evaporated like morning mist. I received a call from William Morrison that afternoon. "The board wants to make things right," he said. "We're prepared to offer a substantial settlement, full reinstatement with back pay, and a senior vice president position." "No," I said without hesitation. "The settlement, yes, I earned that. But I'll never work for Novosphere again. You all watched him destroy people for years. You enabled it until it threatened your profits." "I understand," William said quietly. "For what it's worth, Allison, you've changed things. The whole industry is re-examining their cultures because of what you exposed." That evening, I met with the Signal Group one last time at a bar in Wicker Park. 27 people who'd risked everything to bring down a tyrant. We toasted with champagne that Mike had bought with his SEC whistleblower reward. "What's next for you?" Lisa asked me. I pulled out a folder, spreading papers across the table. "I'm starting a nonprofit, legal support and advocacy for employees facing workplace abuse. We're going to make sure no one has to fight alone the way we did." Jennifer raised her glass. "The Allison Green Foundation?" "No," I smiled. "The Phoenix Project. For everyone who's been burned and needs to rise again." Within a week, I had pledges for initial funding from 3 major philanthropists who'd been following the story. Several law firms offered pro bono support. The website went live with a simple message: "Your story matters. Your voice matters. You're not alone." The applications flooded in immediately. Stories from across the country, across industries. All these people who'd been silenced, terminated, destroyed by their own Richard Vaughns. Each story strengthened my resolve. Richard's trial began 3 months later. I testified for 6 hours, calmly recounting not just my experience, but the systematic pattern of abuse I'd documented. Richard sat at the defendant's table, his expensive lawyer unable to restore the commanding presence he'd once wielded. When our eyes met, I saw something broken in him. Good. He was convicted on multiple counts of wire fraud and conspiracy. The sentence, 8 years in federal prison, millions in fines, and a lifetime ban from serving as an officer in any public company. As the verdict was read, I felt something shift inside me. Not joy exactly, but a sense of completion. Outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded me. This isn't about revenge, I told them. And this time, I meant it. This is about accountability, about showing every employee suffering under a toxic leader that they have power. That documentation matters. That speaking up, even when it costs everything, can create change. What would you say to Richard Vaughn if he were here? One reporter asked. I thought for a moment. I'd thank him. He taught me that power without ethics is ultimately powerless. He showed me that those who humiliate others in public should be prepared for public consequences. And he gave me a purpose I never would have found sitting quietly at my desk. That night, I stood in my new office, a small space in a converted warehouse that would house the Phoenix Project. The walls were bare except for one framed item, a screenshot of Richard being led away in handcuffs. Not a trophy, but a reminder. A reminder of what happens when power goes unchecked. When cultures of fear are allowed to flourish. When good people stay silent. My phone buzzed with an email from a woman in Seattle. Her boss had publicly berated her in a meeting yesterday. She'd been documenting everything for months but didn't know what to do. Could we help? I smiled and started typing. Yes, we can help. You're not alone. Here's what you need to do first. Richard Vaughn thought he'd destroyed me that day in the conference room. Instead, he'd created something he never could have imagined. A woman with nothing to lose, everything to prove, and the determination to ensure that no corporate tyrant would feel safe in their kingdom again. The Phoenix Project would be my legacy. Richard's humiliation was just the beginning. 5 years have passed since that morning when Richard Vaughn tried to erase me from existence. Today, I stand in front of a different building, not the cold glass tower of Novosphere, but a renovated brick building in Chicago's West Loop. The bronze plaque by the door reads, The Phoenix Project, National Headquarters. What started as a small nonprofit in a warehouse has grown into a movement. We now have offices in 12 cities, a team of 40 full-time advocates, and partnerships with major law firms across the country. We've helped over 3,000 employees fight back against workplace abuse, recovering millions in settlements and, more importantly, restoring dignity to those who thought they'd lost it forever. Richard Vaughn is 3 years into his 8-year sentence. I heard through the legal grapevine that he works in the prison library, keeping his head down, avoiding conflict. The man who once commanded rooms now alphabetizes books in silence. There's poetry in that, I suppose. Novosphere never recovered. After struggling for 2 years post-scandal, they were acquired for parts by a competitor. The building where I was humiliated now houses a co-working space. Sometimes I walk past it, not out of nostalgia, but as a reminder of how far I've come. The conference room where Richard performed his executions is now a yoga studio. The universe has a sense of humor. Jennifer runs her own consulting firm now, helping companies build healthy cultures. Mike became a whistleblower advocate with the SEC. Tom, the security guard who risked everything to help me, is now our head of security at the Phoenix Project. The signal group that brought down Richard still exists, transformed into a support network for workplace abuse survivors. Today is special. We're hosting our annual Phoenix Rising Conference, where survivors share their stories and strategies. The keynote speaker this year is a senator pushing for stronger workplace protection laws, legislation nicknamed Allison's Law by the media, though I've asked them to stop calling it that. This was never about me alone. As I prepare to open the conference, my assistant hands me a letter. It's from Richard, forwarded through his lawyer. I almost throw it away unread. But curiosity wins. Allison, it begins. I've had years to think about what happened. Years to replay that day I fired you. You want to know something? I can't remember why I chose you. You were good at your job. Never challenged me publicly. Always delivered. I think that's why. Because I could. Because destroying someone competent made me feel powerful. I created my own destroyer that day. You were right about everything. I just wanted you to know that. Richard. I fold the letter and file it away. His revelation changes nothing, validates nothing I didn't already know. Men like Richard always think their epiphanies matter, that their acknowledgement of wrongdoing somehow deserves recognition. It doesn't. The conference room fills with hundreds of survivors, advocates, and allies. As I take the stage, I see faces full of determination. Anger transformed into purpose. These are my people now. The burned who refused to stay ash. 5 years ago, I begin. I was escorted from my workplace carrying a cardboard box. My career destroyed in front of 30 colleagues who stayed silent. I thought it was the end. But sometimes, what looks like an ending is actually a beginning in disguise. The audience listens intently as I tell the story one more time, not for sympathy, but as a battle cry. I talk about the importance of documentation, of building networks, of refusing to be silenced by power. I share the victories we've achieved, the laws we've changed, the workplace tyrants we've toppled. Richard Vaughan thought he was untouchable, I conclude. He believed his power, his wealth, his connections made him invincible. He was wrong. He forgot that every empire built on fear eventually faces its reckoning. Every tyrant creates their own resistance. Every public humiliation plants the seeds of public justice. The applause is thunderous, but I'm already thinking ahead. There are more Richards out there, more toxic cultures to expose, more survivors to support. The Phoenix Project has applications from Google employees, Amazon workers, Wall Street analysts, all with stories of abuse, all ready to fight back. As the conference continues, I slip out to the roof garden we installed last year. Chicago spreads before me, glittering in the afternoon sun. Somewhere out there, in one of those glass towers, someone is being humiliated, terminated, destroyed by a petty tyrant drunk on power. But now they have somewhere to turn. Now they have proof that fighting back is possible. My phone buzzes with a notification. It's an email from a young woman in Detroit. Her boss publicly berated her yesterday, called her incompetent in front of the entire department. She's scared, angry, unsure what to do. The same story, different city, different tyrant, same abuse of power. I start typing my response. I understand what you're going through. You're not alone. Let's talk about your options. Document everything. Your story matters. Because that's what the Phoenix Project is really about. Making sure no one has to face their Richard Vaughan alone. Making sure every public humiliation has the potential to become a public reckoning. Making sure that those who abuse their power learn that in the age of accountability, their kingdoms are built on sand. I think about that morning 5 years ago, walking out of Novosphere with my cardboard box, feeling like my world had ended. If I could tell that version of myself one thing, it would be this. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the catalyst for the best thing you'll ever do. The sun sets over Chicago, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Phoenix colors. Tomorrow, we'll help more survivors. We'll file more lawsuits. We'll topple more tyrants. The work never ends. But neither does the satisfaction of turning pain into power, humiliation into justice. Richard Vaughan wanted to destroy me. Instead, he created a revolution. And we're just getting started. Thank you so much for listening to this story of workplace revenge and ultimate justice. I hope Allison's journey resonated with you. Where are you listening from today? I'd love to know. Drop a comment below and let's connect. If this story inspired you or made you think about your own workplace experiences, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. Your stories matter too. And this community is here for all of us who believe in standing up to injustice. Until next time, remember, document everything and never let them silence you.